Bonjour French 1, this is your section 1.2 notes all about indefinite articles and plural nouns. Now indefinite articles sound a lot more complicated than it really is. Basically in English the indefinite articles are the words a and an. They're considered to be indefinite as in not definite because basically they can be used before any item at all. You're not specifying which certain definite article or item you want. Instead, you're saying that it could be a book or an book or any old book, not just the book. So it's considered to be indefinite because when you say a before an item or an before an item, you're saying that you just need one of them. One of those, any kind will do. Eventually, we'll learn about definite articles, which is basically the word the, and that's when you want to specify definitely which article or which item you want. So just to give you a quick background, that's basically how indefinite articles work in English, and they work much the same way in French. The difference is with French, there's not a word a for most of them, and an, which only comes up in the English language when the next word starts with a vowel. Instead, in French, the an and une, the two choices for your definite articles for the word a or an, and both of them each mean a or an, are specified based on whether the noun, meaning the item that is following the article, is actually considered to be masculine or feminine. Now, for us as English speakers, that's pretty much easy to determine if you're saying things like a boy or a girl. But when you get into inanimate objects such as a book or things along those lines like classroom supplies and desks and windows, remember that unlike in English, all nouns, all people, places, things, and ideas in the French language have a gender. And that gender is assigned whenever the word and the thing is first created. And from then on out, when you memorize a new word, including its spelling, you also need to memorize the gender of that word. So the word that they use for a or an before any masculine word is the word un. You'll notice it's the same as number 1, right? And then the word that they use in front of feminine items is the word une. And then finally, the word des is on there because it's what happens whenever you make an item plural, meaning if there's more than one. So whether it's more than one masculine item or more than one feminine item, it doesn't matter. If it's more than one, you know for sure it's going to be des. Des basically means some as opposed to a or an. Now, the way you know a plural item when you see it is that basically it ends in the letter S. Every now and then there's an exception to that rule where a word just happens to end in the letter S. But for the most part, just like in English, if you have one book and then you make it plural, you say books. And you usually change the one or the a to some. Same thing happens in French. You'll use des for the word some, and whatever the item or the object is will end with the letter S. The problem is there's no way to tell from looking at a word whether it's masculine or feminine. You just have to memorize it as you go. Now there's all kinds of tips and tricks, and eventually I'll probably show you a video or a website in class that'll give you some ideas on how to better guess. But the rules on guessing are kind of, I don't know, they only work maybe 70% of the time. So while it's a majority, it's not perfect. So I hesitate to teach that to my students, and instead I just teach you to memorize words as you learn them. So I have a few examples here for you because eventually the idea is that you're going to need to know which article goes before an item just based on the item itself and whether the item is masculine, in which case you would use the word un, feminine, in which case you would use the word une, or plural when you would use the word des. Again, plural just means more than one. So for the first word that you come onto here, and I know you can see all of the answers all at once. Sorry, I'm not going to take the time to surprise reveal them to you. Garçon, if you look it up in your notes from last class, you'll notice is the word for boy. So when you're looking at this, because it's boy, we're not going to say some boy. That doesn't make sense. We want to use the word a, but when you use the word a in French, you have a choice between un or une. Of course, boy would be masculine, so it's going to be un. Now, as soon as you smack an S on the end of garçon and you make it boys, you also have to change your article because you don't want to sound silly and say un garçon and have it be a boys and have it not make sense. So if you switch that boy to boys, you would also have to change the a to some, which would mean changing it to the article des. Same kind of thing here with this middle column. Once you know that the word fille means girl, it's really easy to understand that you would use the feminine form of a, which is une. And once again, if you change it from girl to girls by adding an S to fille, then you have to change the a to some by changing the une to des. So une fille is a girl, whereas des filles are some girls. Now, the only column that ever gives anybody trouble is this last one, because when we look at poster, which of course is poster, You can tell right off the bat it's not plural, it's just regular old poster, and so we want to say a poster. But whether you use an or une has to do with whether the word poster is masculine or feminine. If you're not sure, you have to look it up. You can either look it up on your notes, or if you look it up in a dictionary, they'll have a teeny tiny M behind it because poster happens to be masculine. So in order to say a poster, you have to say un poster. Same kind of deal with chaise, the word for chair. There's no way to look at chair and know which article to use. It doesn't end in S, it's not chairs, so it's not simple. It's a matter of memorization and whether or not chaise is masculine or feminine. If you check your notes, you will find that it's feminine. So in order to say a chair, because chair is feminine, you have to say une chaise. Now, most of that's pretty easy to understand. It's just a matter of practicing your masculines versus your feminines. But what I'm about to show you is a little bit complicated. One other thing that they bring up in this section is the idea of making sentences negative. Now, this isn't going to click the first time you hear it, but I have to teach it to you now because your indefinite article, your un, your une, or your de, changes in negative sentences. So we kind of have to take a leap here. The first leap is understanding how to make a sentence negative, and we briefly mentioned this in the last notes video. There are two magical words in the French language that make sentences negative, and those are the words ne and pas. You take any sentence in the French language and you put a ne pas around the verb, and it basically is like adding the word not. It makes the sentence negative. And we learned this on our last set of notes whenever we had the phrase il y a for there is. And if you put that ne and pas in there, I know the ne is abbreviated, but either way, when you put it in there, it became il n'y a pas, which is instead of there are not. Now, the only reason I even have to bring this up today is because if you happen to create a negative sentence, there is a weird rule in the French language that says that the word pas can never be followed by the word un or une or de. So if you took this perfectly good sentence here and you had il y a and then you had Descartes for some maps, like there's some maps hanging on the wall in our room, that kind of thing. And you go and you change the il y a to il n'y a pas to make it negative and say there are not any maps. There's a weird rule again that says pas can never be followed by un, une, or de. It always changes to de. So you'll hear me say a million times over, pas de, pas de, pas de, because you should just get in the habit of saying pas followed by the word de instead of memorizing un or une or de. So that means that actually negative sentences in many ways can be easier because it doesn't matter whether the object is masculine, feminine, plural, it's got to be pas de. So there was a spot for you to try one on your paper. I doubt that you did before you watched the rest of this video, but either way, the sentence il y a une porte means there is a door. If you were to go to make it negative and instead of using il y a, change it to il n'y a pas, you can no longer use the word une porte. You cannot say il n'y a pas une. That does not work in the French language. I know it's a really weird thing and it looks perfectly fine to us, but there's a grammar rule in the French language that says pas cannot be followed by une. Instead, you have to change it to the negative article, as we'll call it, which is de. Il n'y a pas de porte is there is not a door. So again, if that didn't all click right off the bat, basically it's just an exception to the rule that tells you when you don't use an and une and de like you usually would, but it'll take you a while to start recognizing that. So just be aware of it and try to use it as much as possible. So we've already kind of dabbled in this a bit, how to make nouns plural. So basically, whenever you first take your notes in class, we teach you all of your items as being singular. You learn a poster, a book, a chair, a girl, a boy. But it's not always an item in the English or the French language. We often have to make things plural. So we touched on this before. When you go to make something plural, not only do you have to change the word a to some, which means that you're changing the an or the une to the word de, but you also have to make the item itself plural. The good news is just like in English, the easy way of making things plural is by adding an S to them. So you have a couple of examples here of un poster, a poster, becoming des posters, some posters. Une chaise, which is a chair, becoming des chaises, some chairs. Notice again how the article changed and we added an S to the item. So if you did go ahead and try a couple for yourself, the word un livre are the word for a book. And if you wanted to change it to some books, making it plural, you'd have to change the word a, which is the word un, to the word some, which is the word de, and you'd have to take livre and add an S to it. Now you don't always hear that S when it's pronounced, but des livres, as you see it on the screen, are some books. Same thing with something feminine like une fenêtre, a window. If you wanted to change it from a window to some windows, you have to change the a, which is the une part, to some, which is the des part, and you have to add an s to your item. In this case, you're adding an s to fenêtre to make it windows, even though you don't hear the difference when it's pronounced in French. Now that's all fine and good for regular things, but just like in the English language, there are several irregular plurals. So for example, in the English language, whenever you have one fish and then you change it to two fish, it does not become fishes. It doesn't change in the English language. We have several of them that are like that in the English language, and I'm about to show you a couple in the French language as well, where you don't add an S to it to make it plural. There's also some really crazy ones in the French, or in the English language rather, that change in the weirdest ways. For example, if you have one goose, you don't have two gooses, you have two geese. And it's irregular. Or like I have in the example here, you don't have two foots, you have 2 feet. So you can't always just add an S in the English language, and in the same way there are some rules that get broken in the French language with that as well. So what I have for you here are 3 different situations that are a little bit tricky or are exceptions to the rule. The first one is if you happen to have a noun that ends in the letters E-A-U, which I realize is very, very random, but we actually have 2 of them in this section. The word for a board, un tableau, and the word for a desk, un bureau, are both words that end in an E-A-U. The difference between those and what you would normally do is instead of adding an S, you add an X, and it doesn't sound any different when you pronounce it. Notice that the on still has to change to des, the a still has to change to some, but instead of saying un tableau for a board, you could say des tableaux with an X at the end for some boards. Instead of un bureau for a desk, it becomes des bureaux with an X at the end for some desks. Just like how we talked about fish never becomes fishes in the English language, 2 of them that never change in the French language are the words CD and DVD. Whether you have un CD or you have des CD, whether you have a CD or some CDs, you don't add an S to the word CD, and same with un DVD becoming des DVD. And then the last one isn't really an exception to the rule, it's just something that catches people off guard because there's 3 words in the phrase lecteur de CD, CD player. A lot of times people have trouble figuring out where to add the S. Keep in mind that you never add an S to CD. Keep in mind that it's multiple players. The word for the player part is lecteur, by the way. So the S gets added to that. If you were to say in English some CD players, the S would be added to the players part, not the CD part. So just like that in French, the S gets added to the lecteur part. So it becomes des lecteurs de CD with the S added to lecteur, even though you can't hear it. Go ahead and make sure you bring these notes back with you and take a moment and go ahead and do your wrapping up sentence by either summarizing or asking a question if something was confusing or critiquing this video to help me make it better for next year.